Hey guys, what's going on today? In this video, we're going to be breaking down a 14 Dawnbreaker my group was able to time last night on stream, actually. I've been trying to stream a little bit more, so you can always catch me out. My link for Twitch will be down below, but we're running Resto Druid, Beastmaster Hunter, Elemental Shaman, and Augmentation Evoker, so not a meta comp, but also not a bad comp. And in this run, we're really just going to talk about everything that went right and wrong, and just kind of nerd out about the run. In terms of talents, nothing has changed from my last video when I talked about Mist of Tyrna Scythe. I'm essentially running the same exact build, but in this run, we're focusing a little bit more on survivability. The big change that I made was my trinket choice. I'm running Foul Behemoths as well as Swarmlord's Authority. In the Mists, I think I ran something a little bit more aggressive in terms of damage, but in this one, I felt like due to some of the magic damage and the casters in the pull that I felt like Swarmlords would be a little bit better. Anyways, the first pull is going to start off pretty standard. Honestly, I messed this pull up a lot. I didn't effectively, I felt like I messed up my Weapons of Order window pretty heavily. I like Exploding Kegged before even applying like Keg Smash and Rising Sun Kick. But nonetheless, the pull will go down and feel quite comfortable. We are committing most cooldowns to this pull, but we aren't committing Lust. So we have the Beastmaster CDs along with the settings from the Shaman, and we're just going to essentially build this pack up. The big things you're looking out for are going to be the Nightbolt casts as well as the Ensnaring Shadow cast from those mages. Now, the Ensnaring Shadows is unique because you can freedom it. It is a snare, so essentially you can freedom it. You can cast Tiger's Lust on the targeted player. You can also just use any type of snare removal. So if you have a way to do that, you don't have to worry too much about that kick, though it does do a good bit of direct damage. You can actually pre-immune it if you're able to immune yourself from snares. But anyways, moving on the boat, this is where we're going to be committing our Lust to. Now, we don't have CDs, so I'm not sure if this is actually the best play. This is something that we have been doing, but we've been playing with classes that have more frequent damage. Playing the BM Hunter and the LE Shaman, we're kind of hoping that the LE Shaman gets good procs. You can see here the DPS don't really start popping off until much later in the pull. Luckily, our Shaman did get a DRE proc with the Lust, so that'll make his damage quite high. Mostly here, we're going to be rolling out of a lot of our bigger defensives. We use things like Black Ox Brew. We use things like Fortifying Brew. I just committed Diffuse Magic there to help mitigate some of this Tormenting Ray damage. And then we're also going to commit the Health Pot if things go south. Now, these first couple pulls for the Brewmaster Monk are really scary. Later in the dungeon, we're going to feel very healthy. The benefit of the Brewmaster in this key specifically is going to be the bosses. The boss tank busters on the first and second boss are going to be pretty much nullified just by stagger itself, let alone some of our more powerful cooldowns to mitigate. And that was the pull. So big thing, what's kind of cool about these mobs is they actually do a good job at rotating who they put their debuffs on. So when you get targeted by a mechanic, you simply use a DR and you vibe. So it's not too crazy. Anyways, I bugged out on the boat here. This dungeon is so buggy. So I had to kind of gather myself and make my way over to, we go to the east side boat first. This is the one with 4 mobs in it. This pack actually feels a little bit easier than the other one, but you're going to be wanting to keep an eye out on the Web Mage. This Web Bolt cast does a lot of damage to the tank. The Shadow Mage does a good bit of damage to your group. So trying to maintain lockdowns on both of the casters are preferred, but in terms of defense for the tank, you definitely want to lock down the Web Mage. Our Evoker got kind of punished in the last pull, and he ended up losing a ton of his DRs. He had to commit a lot of them to the last pull. So in this one, he was dry. I think we could have prepped better for it, but ultimately it just came down to kind of unlucky who got targeted by that bursting cocoon. Ensnaring Shadow went off on our Evoker. As you see, I Tiger Lusted him to remove that dot, so our healer didn't have to. I think both of our Curse Dispels opted out of playing Curse Dispel. Outside of that, this pack's going to go down pretty easily. I'm trying to bank Fortifying Brew for the next boats. And then I'm going to have like things like Dampen, Black Ox Brew. These type of abilities are going to roll back up. And I'm still luckily holding on to that health pot. And of course, I do have Swarmlords in my back pocket as well. Moving on to the next boat, I've found that it's easiest to land on the back of the hull and move into the pack instead of trying to land in and go right into combat. This gives time for everyone to land. It gives time for your, especially when you're playing with the rest of Druid, time to ramp. First Bursting Cocoon is going to go on to our Druid. I don't think he's going to commit anything here. He's just going to heal through it. He's going to go Bear Form, and Renewal is committed there. Anyways, locking down the Web Mage is key here. The Commander does this thing called Abyssal Howl. Abyssal Howl doesn't really seem to scale all that well into key levels, so you can essentially just ignore his cast. Just a lot of the damage is going to come out from those Web Bolts, as well as this Tainted Slash from the Commander. Luckily, I am able to mitigate a good bit of the damage. Also, the Curse Blade has a small, somewhat lethal tank buster if it overlaps with other mechanics. But for the most part, you have Curse Blade doing Dark Blade as a tank buster. You have the Tainted Slash from the commander, and then you have the Web Bolt. So if all of these go off at the same exact time, you're probably going to die. I'm sitting on Dampen. It does get committed here, though, because I was a little bit scared for my life. Luckily, we got some good damage there from our Shaman proccing, and we were able to finish the Web Mage first, which is kind of nice. I think the Web Mage is priority, but Curse Blade definitely has a much smaller health pool. So removing any of the mobs from the pack will make the tank's life a lot easier. All right, and we're moving on to the first boss. So like I said, Stagger does a lot of the heavy lifting here, like a lot of the heavy lifting. So we're going to be able to kind of depend on that. Whenever I'm playing Paladin in here, it seems to be like I really have to make sure I have a defensive, if not multiple defensives up for every single pull, or every single Obsidian Beam. But here, all we're doing is committing Iron Bark, and that's it. And and Diffuse Magic. But as you can see, I took like no damage from this Obsidian Beam, and that's going to be a common trend for the rest of the fight. So ideally, when you're doing higher keys like this, you definitely want 2 range to be able to bait the Collapsing Knight out. Now, of course, we could be a little bit better about our positionings on them. Putting it right in the center of the boat is definitely not where you want to put it, but that's a-okay. The tank, you just want to make sure they're with like further than like 15 yards away from those, because you don't want to have this Obsidian Beam be too close to these kind of rifts on the boat. I don't remember what I used on that last thing. I think I just had Celestial Brew for the last Obsidian Beam, and that was it. But yeah, Stagger carries very hard in this encounter. And we're going to get one more Obsidian Beam here. I believe this is one that I'm going to... Oh, nothing on. I'm just going to use a Celestial Brew. So like I said, very easy. I'm sitting on the fort if I need it. I'm sitting on the Zen Med. This is a really good fight for Zen Med. So try to use that. See, this is a bad position that we just put ourselves into. That's why you don't want to bait in the middle of the boat, because it forces your tank to the edge. So if you're a ranged player, make sure you're near the edges of the boat and keep the center of the boat clear. Anyways, I like to play this little game where I pick up orbs. You don't have to. And then I will fly back to the center. And so it's interesting. The Obsidian Beam is the major tank buster for obvious reasons. Obviously, then moving the boss away from these rifts are going to be important, but it's essentially just making sure you have a defensive up for every single one. So a decently sized Celestial Brew. In this case, I think I'm going to, actually, again, we had just Iron Bark and Celestial Brew, and I'm super healthy. I'm now sitting on Dampen Harm. I have Zen Med, and I have Diffuse, and I have Fort Brew. So I have multiple cooldowns ready to use for the next Obsidian Beams. Obsidian Beams are kind of weird. They kind of happen close to each other, like within 20 seconds, and then they happen a little bit further out. So it's like 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. I know that doesn't make sense to you guys, but it makes sense to me. Zen Med was committed there right before that final tick. I took almost no damage. Diffuse should be able to carry for the next one, but I may just end up committing Dampen. I think I go Diffuse, then Dampen. It doesn't really matter the order. I like to use Diffuse first because Diffuse is extremely effective and it has a shorter CD. Dampen is just as good as Diffuse, maybe a little worse because it definitely absorbs 50% of the blow, but, oh, I do Dampen, never mind. Diffuse is generally what you want to use first though, because it's just a shorter CD. And that's pretty much it. Just keep up kicks, and then eventually the boss will go down. So skipping forward just a little bit here. So once we fly off the boat, this is what my group does. Not all groups do this. This is what I like to do, though, especially as a Brewmaster player. I'm going to land right in front of the cathedral. I dropped a Black Ox statue over to the left-hand side. This is going to absorb 2 of the first rushes, and then we're going to be pulling this Darkcaster pack on the hill. As you can see, the Umbra rushes, 1 was absorbed, 1 came to me, which is fine. I end up committing a leg sweep there just to make sure that no one else was getting meleeed because threat was a little strange. And then we're just dodging swirls, kicking the Tormenting Beam, and making sure that the frontal's not going to grieve our group. As a tank, you want to make sure you're keeping an eye on these Shadow Walkers. They do this Umbral Rush cast. If 2 or more of them overlap, especially if you're doing a bigger pull here, it's going to absolutely abuse you. Now, what I should have done in this pull is I should have definitely pulled an extra mob, an extra pack, because our Shaman ended up committing Ascendance, and Ascendance is a very strong CD, and it scales very well into larger pulls. So not pulling in more than 5 mobs was kind of a crime on my part. But we're going to go stairs. I place down a knock statue. They eat the first Umbra Rushes for me, and then we're going to pull them down the stairs. Ox Statue is definitely an underrated talent. Some players, actually most players, opt not to run it, but I find it very efficient, especially in some of these dungeons where the mobs open with a specific cast, whether it's a Web Bolt, whether it's an Umbral Rush. So being able to absorb the first blow of that without having to commit a defensive right when you pull a pack is very good. Plus, you're going to generate some early threat as well, because the mobs will auto start attacking it. Then you can AoE taunt, go in for a keg smash, and your threat is then generated. So there's a lot of cool ways you can use Black Ox Statue, which I've been pretty fond of this season. I like it more than Nizao itself, hence why you don't really see people running it. This Dark Flows cast is very scary. You definitely want the healer to be ready for it. Luckily for us, we had a full ramp with Flourish. And then we're going to be going in, and we're going to be pulling just the mini-boss. I'm going to be pulling him out. But because we have a full range comp, I don't necessarily need to run him down the stairs quite yet. Our DPS are going to be able to start doing some damage here. I'm going to get knocked into the wall, and then I'm going to roll off, make sure I'm nice and healthy. And then what I like to do is I like to get 3-target cleave, preferably for our hunter, but also for our shaman. Knocking in the Darkcaster with a Ring of Peace into a kick. And then I'm going to slowly pull them away from where they were pulled from, because there's a patrol that walks up and down this path. So over time, I'm slowly going to kind of kite the mini-boss as well as the other 2 mobs away. Now I'm going to set up a Transcendence. For some reason, sometimes if you jump and you're jumping up, it won't knock you back. I don't know if that's a bug. I don't know if it's like I'm crazy and that's actually not how it works, but you can actually negate the knockback by jumping. But even if it does knock me back, I have things like Roll and Lighter Than Air that'll get me right back to the location. Generally speaking, I like to roll out, take the Tank Buster to the face, and then I dash back to counter the knock, just like that. And now that those other 2 mobs have died, this pull's going to be pretty tame. The only thing you want to keep an eye out for is that debuff that goes on random players. Right now it's on our Druid. He's going to constantly rotate this Abyssal Blast, and it leaves a pretty nasty dot. So our Shaman's pretty dry, so we definitely want to make sure we're keeping him nice and healthy. Again, I'm going to roll out. I'm going to get knocked. I guess I jumped, so I didn't get knocked. And then we're going to head right back in. So this is a pretty safe place to tank him. And now what we're looking to do is we're looking to do a big pull with Lust and Ascendance in the next pull. We have all of our CDs available. We have Breath, we have Ascendance, we have whatever the Beastmaster cooldown's called. So our healer is definitely going to need mana, so this is definitely like a little mana break session for us, and getting this pull gathered is going to take a second. Now I don't do this perfectly. I mess up my Chi Burst to pull, but what we're going to do is we're going to be pulling these 2 Shadow Walkers in front of us, the 2 Darkcasters in front of us, and then I'm going to be pulling the 2 little Tacticians, they're actually big Tacticians, up top. So what I'm going to do is start with the Ring of Peace, get them a little bit closer, get them stacked for Keg Smash, make sure I'm generating enough threat here. I place down a Transcendence, even though I end up not utilizing it. I position myself for the Chi Burst, but my Chi Burst goes into the wall, so now I have to pull at Natty by jumping and taunting. But they are not linked to the mini-boss unless you actually run up there and social pull. So if you're able to taunt one of them or hit them with a Chi Burst, it won't pull the mini-boss. So this is Lust, Ascendance. We're going to blow all of this up. Tacticians are really scary. They have this enrage effect that while I can't remove every single one. But Pressure Points allows me to combat that. But now that they're kind of set, I was going to pull the mini-boss in now, but the problem was the frontals were about to come out. I didn't want to have really awkward frontals while I was going up the stairs. So what we end up doing is we do it basically a pack at a time. But this goes to show you can kind of just play it safe. You don't need to do any kind of giant egregious pulls. You can just pull 1 pack at a time and you're going to be vibing out. Again, with this mini-boss, the big thing you're looking out for is that Abyssal Blast cast that's on our Evoker right now. And you're going to be looking for the Abyssal Blast overlapping with that Shadow Decay. So it's every other Abyssal Blast or every third Abyssal Blast. You need to be super careful, and that's when you really want to commit your defensives. Making sure you're standing in the F-flow is really important. The F-flow just disappeared. Slight mistake on our Druid's part, but that's okay. He's going to get it down here in a second once he keeps us all healthy. And then you're going to see me every once in a while dipping my toes into the F-flow to make sure I'm getting that Spring Blossoms hot applied to me. For me personally though, during this pull there's not a lot going on, so I don't really need to be in the F-flow, but making it a practice to be inside the F-flow is going to increase your Druid's mastery, increasing the heals that you're able to get. Unfortunately, Slagavog went down. It looks like he had Astral Shift here. I'm not sure if he actually did. Omni CD has been a little weird counting cooldown reduction still. But moving forward, as soon as that mini boss dies, all we do is what I like to do is I like to fly right down the hill. I used to go behind the inn and do some weird shenanigans back there, but I found approaching it from this side makes a lot more sense. It's a little bit easier to see everything, and generally just makes the pull cadence is a little bit better coming from this side. So what we're going to do is I'm going to pull up these two packs right here. If you have like really big cooldowns, you could do the patrol as well if you really want to, but not being on my paladin, I'm not comfortable with it. I don't have a ton of silences like prop paladin does. So right now we're just really focused on nuking down packs like steadily. There we go. Words are hard. As you can see, I'm positioning myself into these tents. No one should ever be standing inside of these, and that's where the frontal will be facing, so my group never has to worry about it. We're making sure that we're locking down any of these casts, ideally the Night Bolts. The Tormenting Beams don't do as much damage until they finish their entire cast, and you can essentially stop them with knockups, knockdowns, stuns, obviously like things like Leg Sweep, really powerful there. Tactician is the last thing that's dangerous in this pull, primarily for the tank. He does a lot of damage, especially on this Enrage cast. I cast Paralysis to remove it, and then we're going to pull him into this Patrol plus the 2 Darkcasters. So now it's a pack of 5. My goal in a lot of these keys is keeping it at 5 to 7 targets. I don't really want to pull less than that if I can help it, and I don't really want to pull too much more because we have relative target cap, but we also just don't have infinite kicks like some other groups do. This pull was Ascendance. I could have maybe pulled in Mini Boss on this, probably to get a good start, so something that I might try to implement in the future. But this pack's going to go down, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just pull the Mini Boss, and we're going to be vibing. Another reason he sent Ascendance there is because we're going in about 3 minutes, we're going to be pulling the boss, and that's when he wants Ascendance up again. So holding on to Ascendance for another like 3 minutes is definitely not great. Just send it even on if it's on a suboptimal pack. So this Dark Orb, I hold this guy right here next to the fountain, and I put down these world markers. And this, I don't know if I change my camera angle to show it off, but basically the orb will never hit a wall. It's going to go like up that hill that we came down, and it's going to just expire at max range. The big overlap here, similar to the boss, is when you have this abyssal overlap with the Dark Orb impacting the wall is when it's scary. So it's not on the Dark Orb cast. It's a couple seconds after the Dark Orb cast goes out. So right now it's going out. Slagavog is low. Abyssal Blast is now going to go onto our Evoker. He's at half health. I Vivify him before that orb hits the wall, and then we take a big chunk of damage. If he was at half health, he would have been dead from the Dark Orb hit. So one thing a Brewmaster can do, and this isn't something I talk about a lot, but Vivify healing is very impactful, especially if you get lucky with crits. I'm running a crit potion in this dungeon as well, so I have about 40 to 45% crit based on the buffs that I have. Right now I do have the crit and dodge bonus from my Shado-pan, but basically my Vivifies can crit as high as 3 million healing. So that's half of someone's health pool. It's basically like having a little pseudo lay on hands. Now, of course, you can get unlucky. You could not crit, and my average Vivify outside of if it's a non-crit is about, I don't know, a mil 0.2. So definitely critting will feel much, much better. But regardless, you should be vivifying often, and you can keep track of it with an aura like I do. If I vivify within the next 3 seconds, it's going to reset within 2, 1, and then it refreshes. So you can kind of actually time the resets pretty efficiently. This is definitely not a good pull, by the way. I don't know. I was kind of doing this to buy time for Ascendance. I was doing this to make sure like my healer can just relax on mana for a bit. Essentially, the next boss fight, I believe, is the hardest fight, mainly because there's like 1 to 2 really bad overlaps. Again, Ox Statue goes down. It eats the first Shadow Walker's Umbral Rush, and it eats the first Bolt. So again, Ox Statue really pulling its weight. And then we're going to just make sure we're kicking the Shadow Mage and blowing up this pack. This pack isn't too impactful, kind of same old song and dance. So this guy's eventually going to go down. Now, we have a ton of time. Having 12 minutes at this point, you're good. If your damage has been at this pace, you essentially want to be up on the last boat within the next, basically by the time you hit this line within the next 5 minutes, and your encounter, you should be able to time it. You know, we also have 2 dots already, which is 30 seconds off. I put down 2 world markers. This is just so my group knows where to aim the orb if they ever get kind of discombobulated. Dark Orb is always going to be the first thing that comes out. It's always going to be followed by a Terrifying Slam. And then throughout the encounter, nothing picks up in pace, but you're going to see different timer overlaps. So sometimes it's Dark Orb Slam, sometimes it's Slam into Decay, sometimes it's Decay into Adds, it's Adds into Slam, Slam into Dark Orb. Like, there's just all these different combinations. First Decay is typically pretty tame. You don't really have any other mechanics going on. So that's kind of how the fight works. You just get the first 4 mechanics in a row, and then they start alternating because they all have different sequences. Anyways, first set of adds goes out. Things like Exploding Keg will make quick work of them. Flurry Strikes makes quick work of them. I also have an Ox statue down underneath the boss. This will allow me to AoE provoke whenever they spawn, and the rest of my group is staying right in melee, right inside of this F-flow, and being in this F-flow is going to be key to countering these shadow decays. I also have a tick tracker. Being healthy basically by this tick will keep you alive for the rest of the encounter. I don't think my entire group is running that tick tracker, but the tick trackers are pretty nice, especially as a healer, especially as a tank, especially as someone who can off-heal, who can throw out a Vivify when it may be needed. That was the third Dark Orb. The fourth one is the scariest overlap. So that Vivify, what happens on that Slam is I'm always going to roll out, get knocked back, and I'm going to dash forward to counter that knockback almost immediately. I am now in melee, trying to group up the adds, trying to make sure I'm slamming them. I think I AoE taunted there, I believe. And then this Dark Orb cast is the scary overlap, because what he does is he goes right into Decay right after it hits. So everyone's at like half health when the Shadow Decay starts. So I'm spam vivifying my elemental shaman to keep him alive. We committed things like Turtle, big cooldowns coming out from our Druid. I think he barked himself, and we also had scales getting used by our Evoker. So surviving that third orb overlap is key. So if you're paying attention to the orb counts, just know as soon as the fourth one starts casting, that's when you should start preparing your hots. That's when you should be getting ready to use an immunity. Ideally, you immune right before it hits the wall, so you can immune the damage and the majority of the decay. But as you can see, Brewmaster's not having too hard of a time on this fight. Of course, I am taking a good bit of damage. I am rotating my defensives. Basically, every time a Shadow or the Terrifying Slam comes out, if I don't have Celestial Brew, I'm using a cooldown. Sometimes I'm using them in conjunction with each other. Sometimes I'm just hitting a Vivify to make sure I'm healthy. I don't know when the next bad overlap is. I don't think we actually end up seeing it. Tanks also need to be careful of the Dark Orb into Slam. That's kind of the big mechanic we're paying attention to, because if the orb hits right before the Slam and you're low and you don't have a defensive rolling or any kind of absorb, you're probably going to just die. This is the last Shadow Decay going out. Unfortunately, I think our Hunter ends up perishing here. I don't know if it was overlapped with the Congealed Darkness cast. It looks like a few were going off. I didn't have Leg Sweep. I did have Ring of Peace that I could have used. I just wanted to keep the mobs in the Earthquake, thinking that that would be more efficient than knocking them out of the Earthquake. Anyways, 3 deaths on the board now. We're flying up to this boat. We want to be careful. Don't accidentally click this lady. You can't see her right now, but there's a lady who can port you out of the dungeon. We had that happen the other night in one of our keys where right before we pulled first boss, someone landed and accidentally clicked on that person and it ported them out immediately. Anyways, this mini boss is obviously painful. The reason why we waited a second before pulling was it gave time for our Resto Druid to land and begin ramping, which makes this first Tormenting Eruption extremely easy. A lot of times in Pugs, you'll see a tank just dive right in before everyone's even here, and then you're constantly playing from behind the entire time. Now, luckily, this Tormenting Eruption will always alternate players, so it was first on our Hunter and our Shaman, and now it's on our Druid and our Evoker. The only casts that we're looking out for are like the Shadow Walkers rushes and the Mage casts. Now, I see this Dark Caster that's far. I'm going to Paralysis it just to keep and make sure that we're healthy. I'm going to bring it in eventually later. They're not hard to deal with, but having an extra kick that we have to worry about and this like tertiary damage outside of the Architect's casts is just something that we didn't feel like we wanted to deal with. Plus, there's a little bit of RP when the Architect finally hits 1% health. Again, Tormenting Eruption is always alternating now. Next, it should be on our Hunter and our Shaman. She's going to usher in her last set. There's only ever 3 waves in this dungeon. She's never going to do more than this, so prioritize killing the adds. If you try to push her too quickly, the Architect, she's going to spawn more and more, and you might fall behind, especially on like casts and stuff. So now that she's low, I'm going to knock this last Dark Caster in, and we're going to be able to continue building Spy Master stacks, for example, and just nuking this guy down while Rashanan spawns. So Rashanan is now targetable. I'm going to give our Rest assured, a little bit of time. You don't need too long for this fight. I'd say if you can budget 5 minutes, that's great. You don't need 5 minutes to do this encounter. Damage in phase 1 definitely does matter, but we're going to be lusting and using our CDs in phase 2. Well, specifically Ascendance is not up for a minute 20, but when we land, it's going to be a big, big Ascendance with Lust, which is really good. I don't know if our Hunter sends here. I'd imagine Hunter should send, but maybe he doesn't. I think this first phase takes about a minute-ish. You definitely want to respect this phase a little more because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Erosive Spray Cast comes out a little bit more frequently in the first phase. Our Hunter does an early turtle. He also did send offensive CDs, so he's probably waiting for Trinket or something. Obviously, the player targeted by the Rolling Acid is just going to move out left or right, giving everyone else enough room, and then our healer is going to make sure that they're getting attention with spot heals, because it does do a little burst of damage, especially if it overlaps with this Erosive Spray. So this next overlap is pretty spooky. I am going to be utilizing some Vivifies during this part of the fight and later in the encounter to make sure my team is nice and healthy. We've already seen one set of bombs. This will be the last Rolling Acid until we see the next set of bombs, which will then, now we're able to push. Some groups like to try to eke out the damage in phase 1 a little bit, so you can do a lot less in phase 2. But we just send the bombs. We don't find the last phase all that difficult. We have a pretty good understanding of the last boss fight, as well as how to cycle our own CDs personally. So last fight, we're feeling pretty good for. Now, you can fly pretty much directly to the boss platform. I like to play it safe, and I kind of fly back into the city, and then I fly straight across. Sometimes if you beeline it, you'll get the Encroaching Shadows debuff a little bit early, and I've seen people die to it, because they did reduce it. It used to last for like 12 seconds, and they reduced it to like 9, I believe. So you definitely want to get here quick. Our Hunter's being a spaz. One last little tip about this fight. The boss, once he's like right up here, you can actually hit him with melee abilities. So you're going to see he's not even landing yet, but I'm going to apply Keg Smash and Breath of Fire to him before he lands. And you're going to start getting some early damage out in this phase. We're going to kick in the last second of the cast, in the last 0.4 seconds. And now all we're doing is the same repeat of mechanics. It's going to be Rolling Acid. Unfortunately, it does go on our Shaman, which means he's going to get stunned in his Ascendance. That's not great. I'm going to Vivify him to make sure he's nice and topped. And it's going to then go into Spinneret Strands, which means that these players need to get out of the arena space without cleaving each other. Unfortunately, it looks like they did, but that's okay. We have a lot of healing CDs rolling. And then I'm going to be baiting off to the side here. So you can see these swirls get baited way off to the side, so my range don't have to move. So if you're a melee, you can stand way off to the side on these like little, what is this, a hexagon? Pentagon shape? Pentagon is 5, right? You can stand out here and actually bait those swirls away. This fight for a tank is very boring. There's no tank buster. You take some dot damage, but most tanks are pretty stable in terms of healing. So all I'm going to be trying to focus on is doing damage for obvious reasons, because we're trying to kill this guy, and casting Vivify on my group members who get low. Because again, a good Vivify crit's like almost 3 million HPS, or HP. So in one global, I can essentially heal someone for 50% of their health, which can be very impactful. Obviously, on the lower end, I'm only healing it for like 15 to 18%. But regardless, that's going to save people's lives, not only in this encounter, but in all encounters. If you can find that global for it, definitely utilize it. The boss does die at 60%. So right now he's at 62. It's a little bit harder to see because normally you're used to bosses dying at 0. That was a bad bait on my part. I should always be standing off to the edge if I can. And you can see Flourish got committed here, Obsidian Scales as well, and Barkskin. The next one that comes out is going to be a little scary. We're out of all of our CDs now. We're going to be looking for just like raw HPS. We can maybe turtle it. But for the most part, we're vibing. So I get a big Vivify on QB, our Evoker, and we're looking really healthy. Boss is now at 61%, and the fight is going to be over very soon. So again, we did have 3 deaths, so we would have had a little bit, probably about 2 minutes left on the key. We could have definitely sped it up in some portions. Definitely in front of the Cathedral, could have pulled a little bit more for Ascendance. Definitely second mini-boss, could have definitely pulled more onto Ascendance. I've been playing Paladin a lot this season, especially in these higher keys, so getting used to what I can and can't handle on Brew has been somewhat of a challenge, as it always is. when you're playing something that has a actual immunity on a 1.5-minute cooldown, it's going to a tank that doesn't have an immunity is definitely difficult. But we were able to finish that with 1:12, probably closer to the 2-minute mark if we didn't have a couple of those deaths. But overall, a very happy run, or a very good run that I'm pretty happy with. Only 9 points of IO though, so. All right, anyways, that's the run. Let me know if you have any questions down below, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. If you saw anything that I messed up on, feel free to leave it down below. And obviously a big shout out to all my patrons, because without you guys, I couldn't make content like this. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.